So if you look at orientation itself, you've got a nice mole, you've got some beautiful coronaries that have been shown. Often they're not that obvious in a truncus. And you have to be aware of the coronaries, because they can be abnormal. The coronary patterns, often they arise a little bit higher up than you expect, and they can arise very close to the commissures and sometimes even be almost kind of intramural in their origin, so you really have to watch them. So you're looking for your pulmonary arteries to see really that how the pulmonary arteries relate to the trunk itself. So freeing them up, and I guess these arise pretty well straight at the back of from the main trunk, and so probably slightly more commonly they can arise a little bit more to the leftward side, but these arise pretty well at the back, and it looks like the origins are almost touching each other. So people talked about the sort of Collett and Edwards classifications, which I think are a bit old-fashioned and not very useful, but people always like to talk about it. So if they arise almost together as a little trunk, which is really fairly rare, that was their type 1. And then type 2 was when they arise from two separate origins. And often people call it a 1.5 because they're almost touching like a pair of spectacles. And that's the typical arrangement you see. And the type 3 is when the pulmonary arteries come off really separately, completely separately from opposite sides of the trunk. And Collett and Edwards type 4 was descending aorta. So it was MAPCA. It was pulmonary atresia with MAPCAs. It was the wrong classification. But I must say I don't use it. I think the Van Praal classification is much more relevant because it doesn't worry so much about where the pulmonary arteries come off. It talks about the important variants, which are interruption, truncus interruption, which is type 4, or when the LPA comes off like a duct, which is type 3. And type 1 and 2 are really just the Collett and Edwards classification. Anyway, they come off the back, so you've got to look at your trunk and work out how you're going to manage it in terms of bypass. So there's a good length to the trunk here, so you've got plenty of room to get a cross clamp on here above the pulmonary arteries. It's not always that you've got as much room. And then how do you control your bypass as soon as you run on bypass? Snare PAs, you've got to say you have to have both your pulmonary arteries mobilised and snared, so when you go on bypass you occlude these so that you don't get all the flow running off into the lungs. And then if we cross clamp here, as you can see there's plenty of room today, cross clamp here and your pulmonary arteries are snared, so you give your plegia into the root and there's nowhere else it can go hopefully but down the coronary arteries as long as your truncal valve is okay. So you cross clamp and please, and the first thing is going to be mobilising your pulmonary arteries, And so what we'll do is we'll take them off on a button, and you've got two choices. Some people just transect the trunk completely and then take the pulmonary arteries out on a button, which is perfectly legitimate. The problem about doing that is that you transect it and then sew it back together, so you will shorten it when you put it back together. So there's less room. You're reducing the space behind the truncus for your pulmonary arteries to live and thrive in behind. So that's where you've got to decide. So I must say usually I just open the trunk and then decide whether I can get them out on a button rather than take them out entirely. So I say, because if anything they're slightly more orientated towards the right side, towards me, the first thing I would do is just open the trunk, but you have to open it carefully, and just open a little bit first and have a look inside before you dive in and do anything, because you've got to look and see where the coronaries are. I mean, here in the model it's beautiful because you can see them very obviously, but often in a baby the trunk is short, you can't quite see the coronary ostia very clearly, so you just want to be quite sure that you have a good look inside before you kind of go somewhere that you shouldn't. So you can see the valve down there, which looks good, and hopefully we can see, I can see coronary ostia down there. Can you see that on your TV screen? You can't. Do you want to move your camera? There we go. So, but you want to take your time and prove to yourself you can see where the coronary ostia are. They may only have a single coronary, and they may have coronary ostia that are right up against the top of the commissures sometimes. and before you know it, you're in them if you haven't checked where they are first. So the other coronary is at the back here, but I don't think you've got an ostium, have you, Nabil? I'm kind of poking my forceps in there, but it's at the back. There's not really a true ostium on this model, but you have to really check because you can really get yourself in trouble if you don't look where they are. So we've opened up the trunk, we're looking inside, and we're looking for the origins of the PAs. There's one there, and here's the other there. So we should be able to take them off on a kind of button. And you want to try and just keep a little bit of tissue around. I'm okay, I think, with these. And they're quite favourable in the sense they've almost got a common origin. As you said, they come together almost like a pair of spectacles. But you want to take a nice cuff so you've got a good cuff of tissue to work with. And there's quite a nice ridge. But you want to take your time. Often you've got a bit of blood coming back, so you have to make sure you've got control distally of the pulmonary arteries, so you've not got blood coming up. You want to see everything and just be prepared to drop your flow if you need to. And there they are, they're off. Yeah. So now you've got your pulmonary arteries, so that's now nice and free behind the trunk, and you're left with this defect, and you've got to now decide whether you can just close it directly, which you can often do if there's plenty of tissue, or you want to put a little patch in there to repair the defect. And again, all the time making sure you're well above where the coronary ostia might be. And I think with this, particularly because this plastic is a bit less pliable than living tissue, I'd probably put a little patch in there to just replace the defect and then close the front of the trunk. So The next thing to do is make your ventriculotomy, and you've got, as I say, it's a bit too kind to you, this model, because it sort of shows you you can see the truncal root very clearly on the model because of the way that the MRI sort of has been reconstructed. But often you can't really see the cusps as nicely as that, and you have to remember the trunk comes quite deep inside the heart, and that you absolutely don't want to risk damaging the truncal valve by making your ventriculotomy too high. So I think the first thing you do is start lower than you think you need to. So I know we can see the truncal valve, but I'm going to start at the sort of what I think is the lower end of my ventriculotomy to get into the right ventricle. And then once you've made a way in, then you can look inside. Yeah, and you just have a good look around and make sure you can look up and see where the truncal valve is, and then know that you're safe to come a bit further north. And you know the conduit's going to go this sort of direction, so you try and make your ventriculotomy roughly in the same orientation as your conduit. Yeah, and then you can get a good look inside. To have a look at your VSD, which I hope is here. Yeah, so there you are. It's a nice muscular outlet VSD. Yeah, so it's distant from the tricuspid valve, which is over here somewhere. So you can safely put your sutures into the margins of the VSD without the risk of causing heart block. So you look inside. You can see it's quite a long. It doesn't come right up onto the valve as it usually does. So your patch has got to really run all the way around. Yeah, so around the margin of the VSD and then up around the margins of the truncal valve itself, and you can come up onto the free edge of the ventriculotomy. So you can see it's not going to be a circular patch, it's going to be more of a kind of oval, elongated patch to accommodate everything there. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so you then want to cut your patch. You often tend to make it a little bit bigger than you think you need to at first. And it needs to have width as well as length, yeah? I hope that's about right. I've got a pair of forceps in there. Oops. So if you look inside there, that's probably going to be about the right size. And so I've tended to always do things with interrupted sutures, so I feel it's a bit safer, but today we'll do it with continuous, for the sake of speed. So I'd probably start sort of on the distant side of the VSD, or the part that's furthest away from the trunk, and get your patch down, and then we're away. Yeah, you got the patch one. But I say, because we haven't got to worry about the conduction, you can just stay around the margins. You can see the pulmonary arteries on the TV screen. You okay? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah. And often they arise much more from the leftward side like that. And if they're good sized pulmonary arteries, you can really mobilise them. You can sometimes bring them onto the ventriculotomy like this and sew them directly onto the ventriculotomy, and then all you have to do is put a patch, like a transannular patch, and you've got continuity without having to use a conduit. And that can be quite useful if you're struggling to find a small conduit. But you can only do it if the pulmonary arteries are nice and big and they're not under tension to do that. And I think the other thing that people have described is bringing the left appendage into position, and you sew the pulmonary arteries to the left appendage, and then you sew the left appendage to the ventriculotomy, and then patch over the whole lot. So those are other alternatives if you haven't got a nice conduit. But as I say, we've got the conduit today, so you can use the Gore-Tex tube. So yeah, if you've got a piece. But say if you leave yourself a nice cuff of aortic wall, of truncal wall around your pulmonary arteries, it's much nicer to sew to than skinning right onto the edge of the pulmonary arteries themselves, which are quite thin-walled and more difficult to sew to. So if you can leave a little cuff like that, it's much easier to connect your conduit in. You want it to be loose but not redundant, so probably about there is long enough. Yeah. So I often mark it with my forceps. It leaves a kind of imprint. Yeah, as you can see where your heel wants to be like that. Yeah, and you don't want it too long, so you can match the toe to where it wants to be there. Yeah, that's probably enough. And then you want to be straight at the inside to where your mark is there. You don't usually, with these little conduits, need to cut anything away, but you can if you want to. You can cut a little piece out the back. Yeah, let's just hold it open. Just sort of, that's it. Okay. And that's going to be, again, you want it too long if anything at first. You have a look and see, but you've got to imagine the heart's going to fill up and they're going to pull back a little bit. So probably that's about right. A little bit shorter. Okay. What have we got? We've got 6 again.
Yeah.
And again, so here you see you can actually pick up your patch. There's extra security to really seal off the top of the VSD. Okay, so I'd stop there for a second. If you hold that, Emil,
Yeah.
then you want to, but you've got to get your conduit shape right. Force those scissors in. So you can look at your length, which is probably about right. Maybe ever so slightly, but I usually start in the midpoint. Yeah. And then you want a nice sort of curved shape at the top here. And the same here. You don't want to make it too narrow. Okay. And then, so what you should end up with is there should be longer free edge than there is edge of the patient. And so you're going to near and far it all the way around, so you make like a cobra head.